I think there's a lot of there's a big difference, I think, in a lot of things.
Got it. Cool. So we'll continue.
Yeah, I can't give you good examples, but I think there's a lot of differences with humans, and there's humans have a long range. Humans know effects later. I mean, an animal can go in the same cage and keep getting caught in the same damn cage because the food's there. And there's some animals that they just, I don't think I got one in my backyard right now I'm trying to get rid of. But I think humans know negatives that can happen later.
Yes. I agree with that. I agree.
And it's going to cause them to think differently.
And to some extent, that will modify their behavior. Yes.
Yeah. So what I believe,
but it won't eliminate the endocrinological balance that causes the behavior in mammals.
I'll agree. There's a lot of similar.
Right. So the way I perceive it is that there's impulses that arrive through, I think what Bill would call it basic animal nature. Right. I call it our primal reflexes.
Basic hominid nature.
Basic hominid nature or basic nature, whatever. I think that we have two, terminology-wise, it doesn't matter. We have a primal response stimulus system, okay? That's prevalent in all animals. But we as human beings have very sophisticated cerebral cortex, societal, highly adaptable. Thanks for that, by the way. That was great. That was great. I learned a lot from that article. Yeah.
I think my understanding is there's some difference among species with regard to, like, whether the female primarily attempts to mate with the male that is highest in the dominance hierarchy or not.
Right.
And I forget, I think for humans, I think it's supposed to be that way, that the female attempts to mate with them, people higher in the dominance hierarchy, but that may not be true of chimpanzees.
So in humans in modern society is a perfect example of this duality between humans and animals, why there is quite a distinct separation. And look at who females do choose to mate with. It's not just the biggest and strongest, right? There's a really complex social construct that happens. There's money, but also if you look at the larger number of people that are having offspring, is this not the rich? So is it money that's the factor? No, it's stability, it's a sense of security, it's all types of things, and it'd be unique to every individual female and which male she selects.
But still, you're talking about position in the social hierarchy, which can be determined by various things. Like
that's exactly what I'm saying.
Popularity or money or
that's exactly what I'm saying.
Strength or whatever.
Or novelty. A lot of women choose the bad boy, the rebel. Right? That happens all the time. And so there's all types of reasons. Human choice selection as far as mating behaviors is completely different from any other animal species. Think about and this is true when we look at all.
Completely different from any.
Yeah, so like a chimpanzee, for example, or a gorilla, whoever the alpha gorilla is, mates with all the females. Those are his women. Those are his.
I think he gets a harem.
A harem, yeah, of the best women.
Right, not all of them.
Right.
He has a select group.
But they're the dominant ones passing on the offspring. They're producing the majority of the offspring. So the biggest and the strongest. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
These behaviors are frequency observed, and that's a generalization. There's individual characteristics which later studies among some of the same among the apes. Later studies found out that, and you're going to have to excuse my language, but among bonobos, there's what they refer to as sneaky fuckers.
Yeah.
Males, the beta males who are very not part of the harm, but the alpha male's busy.
Right, and so they sneak off.
A lot of females, right. And so
you can't tend to all of them at once.
That's right.
Exactly what, and that's not all of those behaviors that we observe. We observe only this one particular aspect of those animals' behavior because it's the only one that's gross enough gross in easily observable, they are having sex, they aren't. That's the kind of dichotomy we draw. And we assume from that our understanding of these mating behaviors in these animals is accurate. But if you look at humans, mating behaviors among humans and procreation for offspring are less and less related because of our intelligence.
Sure.
13-year-old girls know that having sex and having babies aren't the same thing. And that means they
hope they do.
Well, most of them do.
They would be surprised at how much of a vacuum, intentional vacuum, many children
well,
are kept in.
that's true. That's because they choose not to learn, which is almost exactly the same thing as knowing.
Well, I think the parents choose for them not to learn.
Yeah, but that's less and less successful as time goes on.
Right. That's exactly part of this conversation, is that the paradigm of which children are now being brought up is unprecedented. That's the point.
Okay, when I grew up, we learned about it from our friends.
Right,
Our
and they're
parents
still
told
doing
us
it to
about
this
it
day.
after we already knew.
Yeah.
And we're very embarrassed, and we told them to shut up. I already know that. You know, and that was before all the three of you were born. You know, that's well, maybe 4, but I don't know. How old are you?
62.
Yeah, I was 11. I'd already found out. You know, it's never what academic society portrays it to be, because academic society is not allowed to say, well, we think there's a lot of these guys that are lying about having sex at 13.
So let's get into if we're going to jump right into that part of the discussion, let's talk about the difference between what parents perceive versus the reality. And I can assure you, it's grossly disproportionate to reality. So what parents believe, their exposure that their children have to this content, in general, not me or the next person, but in general, okay? Parents and children, what the parents in general perceive their children are being exposed to and what their children are actually being exposed to is vastly different. And so the reason is because there's this taboo in our society, and there's this embarrassment factor, just like you said, about talking about these kind of things. And in this new paradigm, we can't have this anymore. We have to change our way we think about these things. We have to have these kind of discussions. This is embarrassing, isn't it, Megan? This is embarrassing, isn't it, Mala?
Yeah.
It's awkward, isn't it? Right? And it's awkward because of social pressures. We're not supposed to discuss these type of things, especially in a kid and adult type, come together setting.
Wouldn't
It has nothing to do with social,
awkward.
it's just awkward in general. Right. It's like,
Do you have conversations about these things with your friends?
sometimes,
And does that feel awkward?
yes.
Yeah.
It is
Okay.
awkward, but you just kind of laugh because they're like
Yeah,
making
it's like
jokes
awkwardly, yeah, it's like you joke about it, it's awkwardly laughing about
And
it.
the jokes come sooner, the more awkward you feel.
Yeah.
So how often do y'all talk about, like what percentage of your conversations, or how frequently, a better way to ask it, do you talk about sex or sexuality in some form and fashion?
Not a lot.
So you're not talking about gay rights and transgender stuff and all that which involves sexuality all the time? I hear you guys talking about it all the
That's
time.
politics.
No,
That's
it's
not
talking
sex,
about
that's
sexuality.
politics.
Well, I mean, yeah, but we're like, a majority of the time, me and my friends just talk about funny videos that we find on the internet.
Okay.
That's what we talk about. We don't talk about.
So do you think that the internet history, if exposed to all the children in your school, would be representative of that?
No. What do you mean?
Okay. That's exactly what I mean.
Don't go talking about her.
So y'all are getting exposed to this content.
What do you mean? Go back. You didn't answer.
Well, I
my
said I
question.
wouldn't ask you specific questions. I'm making a statement. You can just broadly say yes or no.
But like,
Do you have knowledge that a majority of the people at your age are being exposed to this content?
yes.
Okay, that was my point.
I mean, it's obvious. They talk
obvious.
about it so much. Like,
But it's not obvious to the parents, Megan. That's my point.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, it's not obvious to the parents. The
Like-
parents don't understand this.
Okay.
And that's exactly the point. And is that bad?
Yeah.
Okay, so the reason we try to break that barrier is because it's something that needs to be discussed, and for the reasons that we're talking about here, because there's things happening psychologically that are transparent to everybody involved, the kids and the adults mostly. Very few adults have been ever exposed to this type of content.
One of the themes,
I know, Anina.
as I understand it, is the parents feel like the child needs to be shielded from these
Yes.
aspects of
Yes.
living and so forth.
That is the prevailing mentality, yes.
Yeah, and so the question, would be, why is that? And
Because parents don't know about these phenomenons and how it works in the brain, and neither do the children. They just have an intuition of the negative consequences of it.
well,
so
I think there's something. Well, I think
That's my
there are
idea.
cultural
Very cultural.
cultural barriers to
Stigma.
doing. Yeah, a stigma,
Yes, very
or
much so.
even legal danger.
Yes. Mhm.
There can be just fear of having discussion.
Absolutely. School official gets sued if they say the wrong thing, right?
Yeah.
Please, Mike.
Anglo-American society is so much more like this than any other part of even first world culture. It's not uncommon in many cultures for children to be aware of, from having observed, human sexual behavior at all levels of intimacy, and mostly when they're very young they don't even pay attention, and then sometimes they laugh and they make jokes about it because it's kind of undignified and weird, and and they become acculturated to it, and it doesn't cause them any real harm. It's not the sex that causes the harm. It's the condemnation of the desire to know and see other human beings in this aspect. That's unique to Anglo-American culture. That's never occurred until the days of Victoria.
So I agree with what you're saying. To not broaden the conversation, if you don't mind, us going to the world, how things are done in different parts of the world. I want to try to keep it specifically to the always-on novelty, American exposure, what our kids are being exposed to, what adults are being exposed to, and the effects that has psychologically on the mind. Because the unique experience here will be to try to bridge that gap in the knowledge gap between what the experiential thing is between adults and children. So just to catch you up, sorry if I repeat y'all, but I want to get you caught up kind of on the basic premise so far, if you don't mind. So the basic premise so far has been we don't have as adults a precedent for what the environment that the children are finding themselves in today. Okay, this always on, always access to internet and all the things that are on the internet, is a landscape by which we don't have experiential data about. It wasn't like that when we were kids.
Right.
So we're trying to guide our children through a landscape that we are not familiar with. We're familiar with it as an adult experience because we've had it emerge in our lives as adults, right? But we don't know when you're coming up how that feels, like the net effect of that on the mind and the imagination. So we're talking about this. I have this presentation here from this speaker. It's a TEDx talk that I found that I think is great because it explains the actually psychology, what's happening in the brain, right? And why this happens within human beings. And so the idea here is to bridge the gap between children and adults. And so mostly adults have their head in the sand about what their children are being exposed to. If most parents were to fully uncover what their children, the full exposure of their child to this type of content, they'd be struck. They'd be floored. Some maybe not, but I'm talking about the majority. If the majority of adults knew all the stuff that their kids have been exposed to, as far as online content, they would be shocked. Perhaps violently shocked, right?
But their children couldn't push a button that said, yes, I'm 18. They're not 18. They
My
couldn't
child
do
would
that.
never say, yes, I'm 18. Right.
Finally gets with
So this last thing was a differential between the virtualized experiences versus a real life experience.
Okay.
And the takeaway here was to show how dramatically different the list of items are between, this would be the digital experience. Digital experience is usually done alone, right? And it has a voyeurism context to it. Multiple people usually have multiple things going at once. It's saturated and it has constant novelty.
Yep.
Constant novelty meaning you can always see something different, more shocking, more extreme, or there's no limit. It can go in any direction, right? And so that contrasted to the digital, or the real, has this set of kind of features. And so the idea is just to show how dramatically different the real versus the virtual is in this case, right? And so then we go on to talk about what that actually means.
Person. Now, what happens when our guy finally gets with a real mate? Well, researchers don't know much about the effects of internet porn for several reasons. In 2009, when Longinus tried to study porn's impact, he couldn't find any college-age males who weren't using it. So the first serious dilemma is that studies have no control groups. Now this creates a huge blind spot. Imagine if all guys started smoking at age 10 and there were no groups that didn't. We would think that lung cancer is normal for all guys. Undaunted by his lack of non-users, Longinus asked 20 male students, is internet porn affecting you or your attitudes towards women? Their answer, nah, I don't think so. But they've been using it for about a decade then, pretty much non-stop. This is like asking a fish what it thinks about water. Which brings us to a second problem. Now, researchers haven't asked porn users about the symptoms Zimbardo described in The Demise of Guys. Arousal addiction symptoms are easily mistaken for such things as ADHD, social anxiety, depression, concentration problems, performance anxiety, OCD, and a host of others. Now, healthcare providers often assume that these conditions are...
They're being lazy and, yeah, definitely not OCD, but every other one.
OCD takes too much work.
When
Exactly.
I don't know what OCD means.
Obsessive compulsive disorder.
Or like everything has to be like a certain way, like kind of like neat and nice, like this is out of... Yeah, like you'll see somebody like constantly like,
ADHD is?
fixing something, like your paper's not straight,
So, for everyone else besides...
OCD would be actually to a disabling extent. In other words, somebody who has to do irrational things, even though it interferes with normal living. But just having a desire to have things neat and so forth, that can be a personality characteristic that there's a bell-shaped curve.
A trait.
Yeah, sure.
Checking twice to see that your door is locked as you go out is an OCD.
That's correct.
Driving back because you only checked it once.
Yeah.
That's OCD.
That's a...
Fair enough. Good, I like that.
Yeah, that's not a lot of kids in my school. They don't.
Yeah, but a little bit of depression. Had that in the common vernacular in middle school. So nobody raised their hand.
Yeah, I did.
So you had some exposure to that?
They didn't have middle school.
Well, okay, so middle school age.
There was no,
right?
There was no
So 13 to 15
What's
years
the
old.
question again?
So was there much discussion, you remember being 12 to kind of like 15 years old, about ADHD?
It didn't
No.
exist. None of this.
Didn't even exist, right?
Right.
Like, so it probably
ADHD
existed, but
affected.
it,
ADHD
Well, there's some
in fact,
question-
did not exist.
There's some question though about the validity of the diagnosis, and it gets changed around and so forth. And
right, and this is a case in point to that, because symptoms of arousal addiction also mimic these same things. So is it possible that a kid that is being diagnosed, let's say, for ADHD, should be asked questions about what they do online? Because maybe changing those behaviors might alleviate some of these mimic symptoms. So we have to understand as adults that our kids are in a different world than we grew up in. We think we rationalize it because we're adults and we have a perception of the world, and we think we know what these kids are being exposed to. We think, but we're not relevant. We don't have a relevant experience. We have to keep that in mind. We have to keep that in mind. And it's very hard. The temptation is to think we know what we're talking about and what we're doing. Yes, please.
There's people who can be exposed to that certain content that don't have any of these symptoms.
Yes, that's true.
So like a lot of the kids in my school, like there's maybe like one or two that.
Do you know that? Did you see this part though, maybe?
Yes, I did.
So yes, there's plenty of kids that can see this content and not be addicted to it. But when kids have exposed themselves to it so much and they've gotten into a brain chemical cycle where they do find themselves addicted, a lot of the addicts don't know they're addicted, right?
That's true.
When you get to that phase of this consuming this type of content, what this is just saying is these symptoms are mimicked, right, by that type of thing. So no, it's not everybody. You're right.
I don't think I've heard one kid in my entire school, except for her, make a joke about sex, including myself. We've all done it. Every single kid, even the good kids, have made jokes about that. So.
Jokes about what? I missed that.
Just
about sex in general?
Like just sex
Yeah.
jokes.
Okay, sure.
And like not like, you know, bad, like inappropriate, just like jokes about it. But I've never heard Nyla say anything like that, because she's a good child. But every single kid, like all the kids in my class, they've made those jokes and they laugh at them. We
Sure.
all understand what they mean. But then when like somebody comes in and says, you know, like, will actually like give us, you know, information on what sex actually is, like kind of not sex ed, but like just,
Sure.
you know, giving us information. Everybody's like, ew, gross, ew, oh my goodness, that's disgusting. And it's like, you know, what are you gonna do? It's like,
So of those kids saying, ew, gross, that's disgusting, how many of those kids proportionally do you think have viewed that same content online?
every single one of them,
Okay. So it's
except for Nyla.
so there is a common understanding even amongst the kids that the kids have seen this content.
It's so obvious that we have.
Okay.
Every
But
single kid.
it's obvious to y'all, to your age group and to your peers. It is not obvious to the parents, the collective layer of parents. It's obvious to some parents.
Maybe like one or two kids haven't, but those are the kids that don't have cellular devices, like no tablets, no laptops, no phones at home. And I'm friends with one of those kids, and he doesn't get any of the jokes we're joking about. You know, he doesn't understand, like, when we're joking about it. Usually he gets, like, when we're talking about funny videos and, like, you know, funny cat videos. Like,
Right.
That's what we normally talk about.
Well, one of the people on the live stream just confessed that they just went and asked their son when the first time they ever saw it, who's now an adult, and said 9 years old was the answer.
I was 10.
And was shocked to hear that, by the way.
Tiffany.
No, somebody else. Stranger you don't know.
Did it say
1, 2?
10?
No, I think Steve was up first.
Yeah, so as adults, a lot of people are shocked that children have seen this. But the children, you know, it's just every day for them. And so what? It's the water they swim in.
It's not necessarily a so what though, because who's actually teaching them of the psychological effects of consuming that content?
Everybody.
No, you've never heard this information before. You've never heard about the dopamine cycle and what you're about to hear.
No, not that stuff.
We
but,
tried to
like,
talk about it one time, but we never got to this technical level.
No, but like we're learning it from each other, like fellow people.
Yeah, and that's not the best source of information, I can assure you.
Well, kids are gonna talk. Like, you know, you can't stop, you know, kids from
Okay,
talking.
so not just May and I having a back and forth here, but I've been on many field trips and stuff with the kids, right? And I've been around y'all enough to know, like, to eavesdrop on a lot of conversations or just hear them indirectly. I've just become part of the background because I've been there so much.
Yeah.
So I have probably a little bit of an insight into what y'all talk about, you know? And the quality and accuracy of information that y'all are sharing with each other on these topics, I can promise you is very low and not good at all.
That's true.
Right?
Like, I understand what you're saying, and it's not as if, like, adults are just giving, well, they are putting their heads in the sand, and I know the teachers are, and I have 100% accurate proof that teachers hear this going on, they don't say anything. And Nyla can back me up on this. On the way back from the 8th grade field trip, all of the guys on the bus are singing this song, like every single guy. Like maybe 3 or 4 weren't singing it, but because they were in the front of the bus. They knew that they'd get busted, no pun intended. And so if they were singing,
That was a good pun, actually.
It was singing a song about their.
Okay, so a dirty song.
No, it's a song about a guy's, you know
Okay, I
what,
got
and
it.
they're
Yeah,
actually
sure.
saying the words.
Yeah.
And the teachers, I'm like sitting, I usually sit in the front of the bus, and I'm sitting there with my friend Mia, and we're sitting there like, we know, I know, like these teachers, they're obviously hearing what these kids are singing and what they're saying. They didn't say anything. Any normal parent or anybody, like if I were an adult and I heard kids saying that, it'd be like, you know, like if I were the bus driver, because the bus driver was one of our teachers, I would have been like, hey, you know, don't do that. That's not appropriate for this bus trip.
Right.
But no, and these kids are singing extremely loud. It's not like it's quiet, you know, it's very loud. It's like, the teachers know, but they don't do anything to stop it.
Should
But
they?
when somebody's chewing gum or when somebody's, you know, saying shut up, the teachers are all over their business, you know?
Yeah,
Like,
so with the lack of priority the lack of what you think should take priority, right?